Welcome to the Intuitive Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Rafferty, medical doctor, PhD, Reiki, and shamanic intuitive healer. I'm here to bring you on a journey of holistic healing that explores the science of the physical body, combined with mental and emotional well-being, energetic and spiritual health. And I am so excited to have you here again this week to explore something that has revealed itself to me over the last couple of weeks. And it's all about the roles that we play in our lives and how sometimes we as a soul can hide behind these roles and these titles, and how we can recognize that we may be doing that and allow our soul to step out from behind these veils, essentially unveiling the soul behind the titles that we have constructed for ourselves to keep ourselves safe. So the reason why I kind of wanted to do this podcast episode is because we're about 4 weeks in now to the energy medicine course that Becky and I have been running over the last couple of weeks. And I always find it so fascinating when we enter into one of these portals of change. They are deep and they are deeply transformative for the people that are taking part on the journey, but also for Becky and I. So regardless of kind of the amount of work that anybody's done, there's always facets of our world that we're going to continually sometimes revisit, even though we've done lots of work around them. But also new things are being revealed to us about ourselves the further we get into this work. So I always find it fascinating. Every time I do a retreat, every time I hold space for people on one of these courses, so much stuff comes up. And it's just such a precious gift to be able to do this work, but also to allow myself to go deep into this transformative portal of change as well. So last week, we were doing a lot around responsibility in the podcast, and we spoke a lot about that. And, you know, when I recorded the podcast episode, it was because it was one of the major themes of what we were addressing in the course. And also, I was seeing a lot of it in my practice. And, you know, when things start to creep in large numbers, I start to think, what is the world teaching me in these moments as well? So I found it really, really interesting. So I wanted this week's episode almost to be like a continuation of the conversation we began last week about responsibility. And, you know, I just really found myself reflecting very deeply after the podcast episode about how responsibility shows up in my life. And it basically was a string that I pulled that unraveled so much within me. And a lot of really amazing insights came to the surface. And I was like, oh, I would really just love to share this with everybody and hopefully stimulate some thought about your journey in this world. So I really began to sit with what responsibility looked like in my life. And, you know, obviously I work as a fertility doctor, I work as a shaman, as a healer. People come to me for psychic and intuitive insight into their conditions and their diseases and how to heal. And I really, really began to realize the weight of responsibility I carried on my shoulders with all of these roles. And the deeper I got into that, I really started to kind of realize to myself that I hold the weight of every single client's outcome firmly on my shoulders. So although I just spend 1 hour with people, that could be every week or once a month or every couple of months, I literally hold the client's outcome within my body and feel responsible in a sense for whether they go on and get pregnant or whether they'll heal or whether they'll transform. And, you know, it was kind of, this realization was like a light bulb for me as a healer and a doctor, where I was kind of like, oh my God, no wonder I feel so tired after my days. Because every person that comes through the door, if I see 5, 6, 7 clients, I then carry the weight of that home with me at the end of the day, even though I'm just seeing that person for 1 hour. And, you know, I can't determine how people eat or look after themselves or show up when they leave this space. All I can do is impart the wisdom that moves through my body as a channel for whatever healing needs to happen there. So it was a really amazing, amazing insight. But it made me realize that, you know, doing this work every week by the time I reach the end of the week, I'm absolutely floored from carrying the weight of everybody's outcomes on my shoulders. And I see a lot of people that work within healthcare. I see a lot of healers, but I also see a lot of individuals that carry the weight of responsibility from their jobs, from parenting, from looking after their own parents. There's so many ways in which we can carry around the weight of other people's responsibilities on our shoulders on the day to day. So I wanted to share a little bit in today's episode about what I uncovered in the process of this realization and about the energetic weight of responsibility, and I really started to go deep into how sometimes we hide behind these roles and these titles. And, I want to talk a little bit about why we need these identities. But also I want to highlight that we shouldn't let them rule us. And I really want for you guys to be able to sit into this energy and to kind of go deep within it so that you can be freed from it and that you can allow the light, the authenticity of your soul to shine through. And break through this kind of feeling of who you must be or identification by an identity that we've constructed for ourselves. So, what is the energetic weight of responsibility essentially? Responsibility is super powerful, and it can be so sacred and it can be so empowering. And it's a real sign of emotional and energetic maturity. I tend to find when I'm working with people, and I've spoken into this in past episodes, when we can embody this beautiful kind of healed yang energy, the fire that moves through the body with the power of the masculine, we can step into that really sacred role of responsibility and presence for other people. It can literally be transformative. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore getting up to come in and do my job every day, to speak to people and to hold space and to take that responsible role for being a guide for people on this journey. It is an absolute soul gift and a precious part of my journey that I cherish every day. But we have to keep in mind that responsibility can also sometimes become distorted, and it can be distorted into something that's heavy and suffocating and draining. So it's almost like the light side and the shadow side of this. It's almost like both sides of the coin that we're exploring today. And when I actually really sat and felt into the weight of the shadow element of responsibility, that it was my responsibility for everybody's outcome, that's when the shadow element crept in. The weight that I felt on my shoulders, kind of this pressing down energetically. Like everything was piling up above me. And it's hard to kind of navigate when you're carrying this weight. Energetically, it often also shows up with issues in the solar plexus. So I tend to find this is the energy center linked to our sense of self-worth and power. And this is really important because worth is usually tied up in some of these roles. And that's why I want to explore this. Next week, we're going deep into the solar plexus and the energy of self-worth. So I just find that the timing of all of this stuff is really, really beautiful on the energy medicine journey that we're bringing people on. Now, it's really quite interesting because when I started to have all of these realizations about this kind of the shadow side of responsibility, I began to also go through this spiritual, like it was almost like a spiritual death in some senses. Like a shadow side began to reveal itself so deeply. And that shadow began to actually cloud my intuitive vision. So the way that I work in practice is I sit with people, I see things in my mind's eye, I feel them with my hands when they're on the plinth. I get this sense of claircognizance. It's almost like I know what's happening within the body. And they are gifts that channel through me as a gift from spirit. Now, it's really interesting because over the space of a week or two, my vision became really blurred, and I really started to get so nervous that something was happening to the gift that moved through my body. My insight into people's energy, it was still there, but it felt shadowy and shaky. And, I went to see my own healer and I was like, I'm so nervous. I am so nervous. What if something happens to my gift? That's why people pay to come and see me. And then the penny dropped for me. I was like, who am I without the gifts that I hold? Who am I if I'm not the doctor that people to come and see? Who am I if I am not the healer, the shaman, the wisdom keeper for these people? It was fascinating to me. And I actually felt like in those kind of shadowy moments that spirit and my guides were stepping away from me rather than leaning further in. But what they were actually teaching me was a deep and beautiful lesson that I am so much more than just those titles and those gifts that I have been given. You know, it reminded me so deeply that healing never comes from me. I am not the source of this light that moves through the body. I am only a channel. My body and my energy field acts as a channel for this source light. And you know, that was so lovely. That realization lifted that responsible element, that burden off my shoulders. You know, that realization that if I was the channel, that I cannot fail because all I have to do every day is just show up as the channel and allow the energy to move through to just move through me. You know, I cannot control the outcomes of the healing that occurs when people are in my space. I can't control the outcomes of each of my clients that step outside that door and then are the masters of their own destiny. And that was beautiful. It was such a lovely realization that my role was open. It was allowed to be as expansive as I allowed my energy field to be. I didn't need to carry the weight of that responsibility. I just needed to be the guide. And that was wonderful. So that realization really hit home so deep last week. And it was transformative, you know. So that's when another layer of reflection came in. Believe me, they've been coming hard and heavy this week during the eclipse. You know, who was I without all of the titles? You know, I had lived for so long as a pure identification of the healer, of the shaman, of the fertility doctor, of the energy worker, you know. And like I say, these titles are very sacred in so many ways, and they do carry a lot of wisdom and they carry a lineage of healing energy behind me. And yes, they do carry responsibility. But like I say, they can also be masks. You know, that true essence of me, of Tony, was hiding behind those masks. And, you know, sometimes we can hide behind them because we want to feel safe. And sometimes we can cling desperately to them because they tell us that we are worthy and we are important and we are valuable. And what I really realized this week is, you know, I put so much of my worth and my value in being a healer and a doctor. So much of my worth and my value is tied up in that, you know. But the truth is, the titles are just roles that we play every day. They are not the essence of our soul. They are not the essence of our soul. And when we define ourselves only through those roles and those titles, they can actually entrap us in many ways. You know, they can create pressure to perform, they can create pressure to achieve, and generally speaking, it creates this sense of perfection that we need to do them or perfectly, or we're not succeeding, or, you know, our time isn't valuable and we are not worthy if they are not done to a certain level or standard. And essentially, on an energetic level, it's almost like we're putting the cart before the horse, like putting the role above our own soul energy. And when we do that, we are drained because actually the soul should be leading the show. And when you put the horse before the cart, and if the horse is a representation of the soul, it can guide the cart, you know. So I absolutely this realization really just floored me over the week, and the importance of that is so powerful. Now, I just want to speak into why we develop these identities in the first place. You know, it's important to say that actually having an identity, it's not wrong. You know, in fact, it's actually essential for the world that we live in because we develop these identities because we live in a human world, essentially, that needs reference points, you know? So when I say to people, I'm a doctor, or I'm a healer, I'm a shaman, or potentially you say, I'm a parent, I'm a teacher, whatever that role might be, they actually have functions within the societal structure. You know, they help other people to understand how they can relate to us in some way. So they do give structure and they do give us a sense of belonging. And even for a lot of people, they give a sense of purpose. So, you know, identity is not bad. You know, identity actually serves us in a lot of ways. But however, it's really important to sit and kind of think of them as costumes, because if we are on this crazy stage of life performing, they're the costumes that we wear. You know, sometimes they're necessary for the play, and they play a function in how beautiful the play unfolds before our eyes. You know, but without them, we would struggle to orientate ourselves in this world. So it's really important to recognize that they do have a key function. But the one point that I'd really love to drive home today is that a problem arises when we actually begin to mistake the costume for the soul that is actually wearing the costume. So just let that sink in, you know. When we let the identity actually rule us or define us in some way, when we allow that identity to define our worth, that's when we forget the deeper truth of our soul, that we are actually the source of light. We are channels that can channel this beautiful energy of spirit or God or the divine, whatever you associate with. You know, that is the truest essence of our soul. And when we can, you know, strip out of this costume, who is standing beneath the costume? What is the true light of your soul radiating? You know, what is that? Who is that? And the soul is the radiant center at the end of the day. And the light that shines, no matter what role we step into, that is what the truest essence of you is. So, like I say, our roles can carry light into the world, but they were never meant to be the source of the light. You are the source of the light. And when we remember that, we can wear our identities in a lighter way as expressions of ourselves, but not prisons that actually that suppress the light that moves through our body. So, who is the soul beneath the mask? That's what I really started to ask myself with this week. You know, who is Tony beneath it all? When I'm not being a healer, when I'm not being a doctor, when I'm not a shaman, you know, who am I? Who is the truest essence of my soul? And, you know, what does that light look like when it moves through my body beyond these roles, you know? And what is the wild essence of my soul that is beautiful and, you know, perfectly imperfect in so many ways, that isn't striving for this kind of need to validate my worth or my value in any ways? And when I went really deep into that essence, I was like, wow, this is really quite fantastic in so many ways. But what kind of came up for me was, who is he? You know, who is he beneath these things? And that is really what triggered a much deeper level of kind of awareness for me, because actually those roles permeate all aspects of my being, all aspects of my life. You know, I'm always Tony, the doctor, the healer, the shaman. Everywhere I go, that's who I am. My kind of friendships reflect that. My relationships reflect that. And although that is really beautiful in a lot of ways, it did make me kind of go, actually, how can I come back more to myself and to put like I say, to put myself first, to put the horse before the cart rather than the other way around. And for all of those facets of my being to actually be under the umbrella of me as an authentic source of light, rather than me hiding behind the facades and the labels and the terms, you know. I want my soul to be the umbrella. And under that umbrella sits those roles and titles. You know, they are expressions of me, but they're not definitions of me. They are essentially tools that I can use. But like I say, they're not a prison that we become trapped within. And I began really looking back to my younger years in a lot of ways and kind of what I learned through school and through my childhood experiences in my family. And, I really began to reflect on kind of what I learned in my home. And my gorgeous father, he only said last week, it was so fascinating having a conversation with himself, my mother, around some of these things. He was saying that education actually saved him. It saved him. It helped him to live a whole other way of life. And I just loved hearing his stories about his childhood and how education allowed him to step into a new way of being. And it's so funny because within my home growing up, we all really valued education. And, that's why I went off and did a million degrees. But it's funny because what came from all of this teaching and this education and these lessons and all of this stuff that you learn through academia and school was, ultimately at this point in my life, I've realized that they have taught me so much. And that's what's facilitated me being able to do what I do today. But also, what comes through academia, and especially in medicine, is this fact that you never know enough. And it created a hungry monster within me that just kept striving to have all the answers, And actually, it had kind of stopped me from recognizing that the true essence of my soul wanted creativity. I kind of lost touch with the younger version of Tony that loved art and was deeply connected with nature. And, that magical soul-based essence of myself had kind of become shadowed through my academic experiences and through the titles that I then began to carry and hungrily pursue throughout those later years of my life. And what I have loved about going on this energetic journey with people on the energy medicine course and with all of the gorgeous clients is that more and more people are waking up to this. Did we learn that we needed to show up in a certain way because it was part of our familial conditioning, in that something was valued very highly in the family unit? Perhaps you were in a school in which certain things were valued very heavily within the school structure. I always loved art. I actually started putting together a portfolio to go to National College of Art and Design. But, I went and I saw the education advisors in school. And, a lot of the perceptions around me at that time was that art is never going to make you money. You need to go out and you need to do something, business or science. And ultimately, I felt so discombobulated at that intersection of my life that I took 2 years off after I finished my high school, because I was like, well, I was drawn more towards creative and artistic expression than science at the time. So I just wanted to pursue that. And because it was causing so much conflict within my body, I just went traveling and lived my best life for 2 years before ultimately taking the advice of all of the people I greatly respected at the time to enter into a career and pursue education that was linked to to things that were perceived as being successful in the world and that would make me money. And essentially that was the tipping point in which I stepped away from my light in my soul that allowed the creative juice to flow, if you know what I mean. So what I've really loved over the last couple of weeks is it's made me kind of reflect on those younger years of my life and think, oh my God, remember I used to love drawing. Remember I used to love this kind of creation to the creative element within me. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love where I am right now. I adore that I have this beautiful healing space and I can straddle the worlds of Western medicine and Eastern medicine and all these traditional ways of approaching healing. I just think it is such a precious gift and it has absolutely been part of my soul path. But what I have deeply resonated with over the last couple of weeks is actually, what about the creative aspect of my soul that maybe I haven't tended to as much while I built this business? I do think a lot of my creative energy flows into this business. Absolutely. And I love having that outlet to be able to do that. That's one of the joys about being a business owner yourself. But it has made me go, outside of my business, what can I channel my creative energy into? And what art can I create? What knitting can I do? Where can I actually express all of these things? So, what I would love for to provide you with at the end of this journey and these reflections is what you can do, to take this into account in your own life. And I'd love to be able to offer you guys a few reflections and practices. Firstly, I would love for you to sit down and just notice or reflect on or journal about the titles and the roles that you hold. What words would you use to describe yourself? That is the first thing to reflect on, to journal about. Are you a mother? Are you a father? Are you a partner? Are you a leader? Are you a healer, a teacher, a worker? What are you in the world? What titles and roles do you describe yourself by? Then I want you to ask yourself, what would remain if you peeled away those titles and roles? You know, who am I without this doing, without this achieving, without this proving within that title or that role that you have? What would remain if you peeled that away? And I want then for you to sit and check in with your sense of self-worth and value. Do you tie your sense of worth or value to these outcomes, to success, to the results, or how others respond to you? Do you tie these things to your title and your role? Does your worth remain hanging in the balance if you peel the title or the role away? Do you anchor yourself in that energy? Or does your worth and your value come from the sense of your soul by simply just being you in the world and radiating your energy into the world? So there's some really nice practices you'll be able to do today. And if you've identified that you're carrying the weight of the world, of the people, of the clients, of all of these things on your shoulders, I would love for you to just sit and tune into the body when you're thinking about these things and ask Spirit to come and lift that weight off your shoulders so that you can stand in a taller, in a lighter, in a freer way, so that your heart can feel expansive to allow that beautiful essence of your soul to move through it. For you to step back into the soul space, to be the channel for that light, and I just love that. You can allow that light to permeate every title and role in your world when you recognize that that's the most authentic nature of who you are. So just to finish up, as I sit here today, after this couple of weeks of deep internal dredging with regard to my relationship to the roles and responsibilities that I hold in my life, to how my worth and value is tied up in that, and to this kind of identification of who I am beneath that, I feel lighter. I feel different. I feel that I can approach the world in a clearer way. And, when I show up and just say to Spirit that I am a channel for whatever divine healing needs to happen on that day, and I just allow that light to radiate into that space, I have to tell you, my sessions have been so incredibly powerful. And people are leaving with a sense of determination because I've handed the responsibility back to them with the wisdom that I have imparted upon them from my education and my teachings within these roles. I now know that my worth isn't necessarily tied up in how well a session goes or whatever a client conceives or whether a client conceives during the journey with me on the fertility journey, or whether they step into their gifts that I can see innately exist within their energy field. What I've realized is that my worth comes from just being Tony, from being a soul first, for me to just hold space for people to come through, And I really feel deeply in my soul that the same is true for you, that you are not a job, you're not a role, and you're not the title that you've collected on the journey in this lifetime. You are a soul, you are a source of light. And although your roles and your titles and your gifts, they are sacred tools that you can use, they are not the whole you in this world. So as we finish this podcast this week, this is my invitation to you. to take one step to show up for yourself first, whether that's in your family, your work, or your friendships, or whatever that might be, and see what it looks like to show up as you, as your soul, before the role that you actually have constructed for yourself. Because when we live that way, the weight lifts off our shoulders, the energy flows through us, and our soul shines. It just radiates through every role or title with such ease, you know? So that is my insight for the week. Hopefully it resonates with you guys as I tell a bit of the journey of kind of self-reflection, and how hopefully it can resonate and help you to step more authentically into the power and the light of your soul. So with love from my heart to yours this week, I am sending so much love to you from Dr. Anthony.